Thanks to Steph and Peter and Savannah for inviting me, for putting on such a brilliant summer school, and thanks to you all for sharing your really exciting, genuinely exciting work. It's been a real privilege to hear what's really going on in the world over the past few days. Human memory has long been defined by its metaphors and media that gave it substance, strength and vitality. Pick your discipline and the chances are that it sees media as augmenting and extending memory across time and space. And with digital media and technologies, these metaphors and ideas have proliferated. Prosthetic, extended, networked, connective. And another of memory's key shapers is warfare, seen as worthy of remembrance and as a key driver of the Western contemporary memory booms. In fact, there would not be memory studies as it is today without war. But in starting with memory, are we asking misleading questions about the impact of media and technologies on the past? And has the pursuit of memory of war and genocide really helped prevent their recurrence? I'm going to focus today on media rather than war part of this question. And what I want to ask is, if it is that digital media's most radical collaborator is forgetting, then how can we arrest and make sense of pasts that have been, for the most part, universally defined and explained in terms of memory? Is it not time for the fall of memory and the rise of forgetting? So this presentation offers forgetting as the defining mode of our relationship with the past, rather than as memory's silent partner. And to this end, I treat forgetting holistically as I'll come back to this term later, as a connected ecology between individual, social, cultural and organisational domains. And as always shifting, always dynamic. And as you might guess, I take digital media as the principal shaper of how and why individuals and societies and organisations forget. And my approach is founded in treating forgetting its worth and its possibility as a conundrum. Forgetting must be avoided, yet it is easy. It is essential, yet impossible. And it's precisely because, and we've talked a bit about this in the past few days, there is a kind of excess of the past made present. Societies have become increasingly swamped in connectivities and cultures of remembrance and haunted by all the digital traces of the self, that forgetting becomes urgent. The kind of past seems bloated, and yet our algorithmic present seems impossible to capture and to preserve for use in the future. And I take, as I said, at the heart of this conundrum, digital infrastructures and cultures of participation, fostering new and unpredictable entanglements between humans and machines, ushering in these paradoxical challenges of both forgetting and not being forgotten. And finally, at the end of my presentation, I want to come back to this question: how can forgetting be represented and understood? It's easy to represent memory. It really is, with our metaphors and our concepts. But forgetting is much more tricky. So how do we go about that? I will argue through, of course, interdisciplinary and collaborative work. Okay, so digital media have made the world sticky. The more we become social through messaging and editing and posting and circulating and linking and swiping and liking and mixing and remediating of digital content, the more we become participants in media. And the more our entanglements leave traces of us. These traces usher in a profound uncertainty of our age, of how and when and where we are seen in the world out there, and by whom and to what ends. And this is a problem of control over self and society not being forgotten. At the very same time, the astonishing connectivity of digital networks and social media deliver a view unprecedented in history, as Kelly says, from the perspective of a pre-smartphone age, Only small children would have dreamed such a magic window could be real. But today, this is some weird window. More Alice in Wonderland, the more we look, the more we change what we can see. Algorithmic memory, for instance, is a contradiction in terms, as what we seek is changed by ours and others searching as we carve out archives of self. Furthermore, the processing and the managing of the past by the complex connectivities and scale of digital records also makes the past vulnerable to insufficient resources and oversight invested to ensure against the prospects of what many call a digital dark age. And I'll say a bit more about my research on this in a while. So this is then a problem of control over self and society's capacity to see and to find itself of being forgotten. So I want to lay bare some of the digital paradoxes of forgetting. I argue that the past is broken, and then this work feeds into one day a book which will be called The Broken Past, which I think is a nice short title, talking short titles. Yesterday, it's a strong short title, The Broken Past. So I'd be very interested to see what you think of that as a prospective title. But to do this, I want to focus on what many see as two, as I said, the principal shapers of memory in the modern world, media and warfare, and I'm going to talk more about media, as I said. So in this way, I turn, as I mentioned at the beginning, these kind of conventional understandings, if you like, on their head, of media seen as strengthening and augmenting, and warfare, as I've said, seen as both worthy of remembrance and driving the Western memory booms. And so part of my interest in how did I become interested in forgetting? Well, from a curiosity really. One of the paradoxes of the success of the Journal of Memory Studies is that the most downloaded and the most cited article in its decade-long history, year after year after year, is on forgetting. Paul Conundrum's 7 Types of Forgetting is essentially again, a nice short title, a taxonomy of the cultural and social rather than individual forms of forgetting. Conundrum is a social anthropologist, and I've long kind of puzzled over this article's success. You know, is it because, as we go back to yesterday, the question of the short title, is it because it's a neat and accessible taxonomy? Is it because Conundrum hasn't published very much and his books are thin and small? Or is it because, compared to work on remembering, there's a significant deficit in work on forgetting? As I said at the beginning, the study of memory has such a rich set of concepts and metaphors. We've heard so many of them here over the past few days, including those embedded in media, whereas the study of forgetting has no such framework for understanding and inquiry. And this is Dresden's argument, of course. The language games that develop around memory are inventive and vivid, the language forgetting is poor by comparison. The verb to forget has no accompanying noun. What you remember is called a memory, but what you forget is called a... And, across the field, forgetting when considered at all is often as an afterthought, as something secondary to or which follows from the importance of memory. Both in the public domain and in academic work, forgetting is treated both as memory's poor relation, and yet it is also seen as the opposite of remembering. But also forgetting, of course, is routinely treated as something to be avoided if possible, whereas remembrance is often seen as intrinsically worthy pursuit. And Conundrum and others do challenge this idea, but a recent intervention in the field is David Reef's In Praise of Forgetting, proposed by Yale in 2016. And Reef, provocatively, his provocative character, takes to task some of the canon of the field of memory studies. Marguerite, Ricoeur, Nora, who obviously champion the political and moral value and necessity of remembering. And Reef asks, what if they're all wrong? What if over the long term forgetfulness is inevitable? While even in the comparatively short term, the memory of an instance of rightful evil up to including Sharer itself, there's nothing to protect society from future instances of it. Okay, so first though, what is critical to grasping the nature and significance of forgetting in the digital age is a move away from the idea, as I said, that it's somehow the opposite of remembering, or as a loss of memory, as absence. If we see memory as dynamic, as a production of interconnections, rather than being static and stable, with the potential to be cued, then forgetting in some ways can be conceived as a kind of blockage or interference with that connectivity of the memories coming into being. And to help with this view of forgetting, it's useful to look at interdisciplinary work and the view from neuropsychologists such as Martin Conway and the artist Jonah Illingworth. And here's an extract of Conway in conversation with Illingworth around connectome. And connectome is a map of neural connections in the brain. And Martin Conway, Catherine Loveday, Jonah Illingworth. Loveday is another neuropsychologist, I think I describe her as, have been working with Claire for several years. And following a trauma to her brain at the age of 44, Claire can no longer remember much of her past, create no new memories, or recognise anyone, not even herself. And Claire suffers from retrograde amnesia, anti-retrograde amnesia, and prosopagnosia. And I vividly remember meeting Claire, although it's highly unlikely that she'll remember me. And it's only when you begin to think of this forgetting of the mundane that it really strikes you how fundamental it is to our sense of self and our whole social existence. And Claire suffers from alesia, a kind of petrified scar tissue that prevents many of the kind of neurons beyond this area of damage from firing. They simply do not, to cite Conway, they simply do not get the signals they used to from the other neurons or neural networks, and so they too will be changed, end quote. And so Conway, Loveday and Illingworth have worked with Claire using SenseCam. SenseCam is a small sensor camera worn around the neck, which takes point of view images every time the camera moves or every 30 seconds. And when Claire reviews these images, an image on occasion will cue access to a sudden flood of intense recollection of an event she would otherwise be unable to remember anything about. And for me, this work highlights remembering both as a dynamic process, but one vulnerable to being damaged or hidden or isolated through interference and blockage. And there are long-established psychological theories of human forgetting. Proactive interference, retroactive interference, and I'm interested in how these kinds of forgetting might usefully translate into thinking about blockage in social or cultural memory. And I'll come back and consider one in a moment. But first, retroactive interference. Whereas Badley argues, thoughts we have inhibits all the other thoughts we could have had. And this idea of overload, we've discussed a bit already this week as well, of distraction is associated, of course, with digital communications and consumption, as Borgman explains. Whatever we've summoned up to appear before us is crowded by what else is ready to be called up. When everything is easily available, nothing is commandingly present. And in 20th century media ecologies, the incoming present, the flow of information available to us was limited by the media of the day, TV, radio, press. Media consumption was comparatively contained, although it didn't appear so at the time. But today our present is not only saturated by this, apparently limitless supply of information, but also by the bewildering opportunities for producing and sharing and publishing the self. The incoming present then, what is seen or not seen, commented upon or ignored, is increasingly determined by algorithms. And this produces a very different structure to knowledge and to the experience of events. The digital record of life and events is fundamentally different to the record of events in the pre-digital era. This transforms the very constitution and the potential of that record to be seen or not seen, to survive or endure. And in my work, I make the argument that feeds into a profound uncertainty, which I'll come back to in a minute. So, in this way, you might suggest that we're moving to experience an algorithmic past. The past is caught up in this paradoxical algorithmic narrowing of information, knowledge and life. The contemporary phenomenon of digital and political polarisation is shaping an alienation from the past, a form of social forgetting, some argue. And today others argue that a collective familiarity and a collective memory, if there is such a thing, which of course there isn't, seem much more difficult to grasp. Despite the kind of digital tsunami of information, the unlimited possibilities of filtering and customization, atomize access and experience. And this seems not outcome, given that the key criteria for algorithmic selection and curation is popularity. The links, the likes, the recommendations of a seething digital multitude. And this is what I call a sharing without sharing, how individuals and groups feel active in an array of connected practices that I've mentioned, the recording, the swiping, the linking, the liking of digital content. And yet we're barely conscious of the algorithms that underpin and shape these practices. And these algorithms that value sharing perversely, as I've said, limit the range of content that can be shared. And so in some ways algorithms work as one of the principal mechanisms of forgetting of the digital age, you might want to argue. The digital tsunami disrupts old memories by blocking them, by filtering events in new and unknowable ways, as we don't understand how algorithms and changes to them work. At least in earlier media ecologies, we had something of a clearer understanding of how information was produced, recorded, and filtered. So what I am saying is there is a spectacular uncertainty as to the basis of the formation of the algorithmic past. But at the same time, algorithms also function this first category of interference, where old memories disrupt new ones. And most contemporary approaches to remembering treat memory as an active process, whereby the past is reconstructed in the present. So what is remembered is not some more or less accurate trace of the past, but rather a remaking, a revisioning of past events significantly shaped by the context of recall. And of course this view of memory of the making active of the past and the present can be traced back to early psychology, Head and Bartlett, Bartlett claimed the key process of remembering involves this kind of reactivation of consciousness, a reactivated site of consciousness. And increasingly this attitude to the past, as Bartlett puts it, to this mass of organised past reactions or experience, is manipulated visibly and routinely through the function of algorithms. The past inhibits rather than helps the formation of new memories. So Sorter, for example, argues those whose past is legible will be exhorted to repeat it. She identifies 3 memory systems of predictive text, reminiscence databases such as Facebook Memories or TimeHop that represent images or events that it determines are significant from your social media timeline, and also data doppelgangers, those ads that follow us around on the internet wherever we go. And this is the core strategy, she thinks, of these models. So the difference today, you might say then, is that images have become weaponized, changes their function as conveyors or shapers of the past. And it's not only their representational or contractual qualities between spectator, photographer and image, if you like, Ariola Azule's work. It's not just these that are significant to their spread or the impact or the lifespan, but that they are part of a broader datified media ecology in which they are extracted and connected and mined and shared machinically to create what I have called new memory. And to go back to our conversations yesterday about, some of you were expressing concern about publishing too early and then looking back and regretting something or saying you've got something wrong. I published this article on new memory in 2001, so that means I must have written it in 1999, and so that's almost 20 years I've been developing this notion of new memory, and new memory is a very, very simple concept. All it means is to draw attention to the fact that memory is constantly changing because it constantly is shaped by and unsettled by the concerns of the present. Memory is always new. And okay, I've modified that and extended that concept over the years, but it still kind of holds up. So what I'm saying there is just be brave and get your stuff out there, I think is the lesson from that. But new memory, a new memory, of course, as I also define it, is also about, like extending of the concept now in later years, how the value placed upon remembering and forgetting also changes over time. But new memory in the digital age is datafied, a big data vision of a past that was not only forgotten, but which was often not even there in the first place in a shareable form or in a social or organisational form at any given point in time. This is a kind of perpetual archive that exposes the media of the past to an array of new uses and abuses. And as Pagner argues, in a machine-machine visual landscape, the photograph never goes away. It becomes an active participant in the modulations of life with long-term consequences. And he goes on to say, to quote him again, images have begun to intervene in everyday life, their functions changing from representation and mediation to activations, operations, and enforcement, end quote. So, what was once a steady and fairly predictable, what I call decay time of media and memory, has been fundamentally messed up by the digital. So, I'm citing myself. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, just having an odd day. So, what I mean to say is that the passage of a broadcast era decay time that kind of afforded value and made the past kind of worthy of careful excavation, a representation, reimagination. It was this media that reached its kind of denouement of memorial power, but also of decay in the late 20th century, in the mass market for the audio and video cassette recorder. It seems strange then to say that this was a media of deterioration of decay time, but this actually underpinned the contemporary memory booms, the archival tendencies of which were driven by the principles of scarcity and the bounding of space. The fortune of archive is case in point. But today's archive is a medium in its own right, liberated from archival space into archival time, to cite Wolfgang Ernst. And there are new uncertainties and risks from the messing up of decay time, notably from what I call emergence. The massively increased potential and thus uncertainty for media data to literally emerge, to be discovered, disseminated instantaneously at unprescribed and unpredictable times after the moment of its recording, archiving, and loss, which can then transcend or transform which is known or thought to be known about a person, place, or event. And in some of my work, I developed this in relation to Yik Yak, for example, which is a popular. It's like Snapchat, really. This sense of a growing popularity of these meshing apps, which offer the prospects of a definite limit of existence and availability of a sent message. And we talked about this already this week. And this shift to the algorithmic past and how it's made legible is critical as it shapes what will be findable and usable in the future. And this relationship is similar to how human memory works. So they go back to the Conway and Loveday and Cole, who argue that our individual memories shape what we consider to be plausible to happen in the future. They write of a remembering, imagining system. And as the artist Joan Illingworth says, if you suffer from amnesia, it makes it very difficult for you to not only habit your past, but it becomes equally difficult to imagine the future in any detail. So, another of my key tensions of digital forgetting is that on the one hand, we have this, a kind of new cultural political force of the, what I call the digital fostered values of openness, and Bible commentary, open access, freedom of information, the right to know, the immediacy of instant search, confessional culture, recording of everything. And yet, at the same time, algorithms function to shape new human-machinic relations that narrow and repeat the past. The predicted and datafied self is a product of its new interactions. Sauter claims to be more like the cliché of you. And more widely, the evolution of the social media archive reshapes the boundaries between forgetting and not being forgotten. And you know, digital participatory cultures develop with such speed, the capacity for controlling what is captured in an archive and what is not has unleashed a whole new crisis of ethics in terms of the governance and ownership of pseudo-private, public and personal official communications, as with Hillary Clinton and also several of Trump's administration's use of private email accounts for official White House business. So there's kind of divide between those that have lost control over their personal information entrusted to digital communication systems, which are hacked and used against them, versus those that have the capacity to control their digital traces. For instance, the use of BlackBerry Messenger in the 2011 London riots, through to mundane or criminal use end-to-end encryption messenger apps, such as Telegram, or that Trump's White House staff are using Confide, which is a communications app that deletes messages once they've been opened by the recipient. But the ownership, access and manipulation of digital traces in this hybrid personal public space of social media is one of the central issues of what Catherine Happer and I call the post-trust archival era. And just to capture the digital values of openness I've been talking about, here's a quote from the incoming New York Times Sunday Style editor. Please leak everything. But for me, these digital values of openness shape a cycle of forgetting in other ways. You know, the expectation that digital materials and records will be available forever leads to a carelessness over curation and archive. A limited value is afforded to the responsibility for keeping and preserving, which of course diminishes the likelihood of what will be accessible and usable in the future. But compared with paper, digital records are more at risk precisely because they don't seem like records. The ephemerality of any time, anywhere, web and communications media foster a view of them as not being part of the public record. Whilst digital media offer new potential for an amazingly rich future memory and history of the everyday of individuals and organisations of governance, it also ushers in these profound new risks. At one level, the risk of digital forgetting comes from poor archival cultures and practices, technological obsolescence, and from the sheer volume and complexity of media content that's seen constantly in motion by the multitude, how we comment upon, retweet and link and like. But it's this living archive that encourages a lazy, misplaced faith in accessibility as a constant. For example, in many organisations, emails are routinely copied to various recipients, either without thought as to potential future existence or value, or with the assumption that someone else is retaining a copy. And the short-lived White House communications chief, Anthony Scaramucci, declared a day after his appointment on Twitter, "For transparency, I'm deleting old tweets. Past views evolved shouldn't be a distraction. I serve the President of the United States agenda And that's all that matters. And despite Scaramucci's crass irony here, the point about evolution is an important one in terms of the capacity for the mass recording, accumulation and availability of digital hybrid personal public records to actually mess with human temporality. And Scaramucci, of course, wanted to erase traces of some of his earlier left of centre views, I guess, as these might clash with those of his new boss, President Trump. But of course, the living archive of social media ensnares us all into having to accommodate new kinds of entrapment of our shifting paths, once much more easily moved on from. So, for me, this is kind of a new battleground of forgetting privacy and ownership, as fought out through attitudes to the status and ownership of an array of emergent digital communication forms, notably those that muddy privacy and publicness in their increasingly archival default forms. At one level, the risk of digital forgetting comes from these poor archival cultures, as I said. But with the digital ideology, and it is an ideology of openness, it enables new gatekeepers to wield power without accountability in reshaping organisational historical narratives through the in Britain and beyond. And so moving more broadly now, the historical record of organisational culture is, sorry, I forgot, I did put in the definition of ecology. This kind of informs a lot of my work in terms of media ecology, and I think it's a really useful definition. Again, it's about the interaction between different elements gives us something more. So Postman's quote, I think, is really useful. The word ecology plus the study of environments, their structure, content and impact. And this has shaped a whole kind of history around media ecology through McLuhan. I mean, people were doing similar work to this earlier on, but it's really Postman that kind of nailed the definition. And this is in a very obscure book about education, if you're interested. But it's really influential in media studies, a whole lineage of media ecology. So what I was going to say is that the historical record of organisational culture is especially vulnerable to reshaping when it's carried through social media. So Muir and McGammon identified a series of deletions from the US Joint Task Force Guantanamo, with tweets in their feed dropping from 1,097 in August 2016 to 509 in November in the same year. The ultimate filters of the world of information, the platforms and search engines, and the image and video sharing websites enable new ways of sifting and sorting and hiding and ranking of information. So the past is now filtered through these new hierarchies of information. So for instance, in response to the scandal of Russian disinformation being spread online, Google's CEO said that Google were going to adjust their ranking algorithms so that Russian disinformation is more difficult to find. But he denied going as far as to ban the news sites in question. So to cite Smith, we don't want to ban the sites, that's not how we operate. I'm strongly not in favour of censorship, I'm very strongly in favour of ranking, it's what we do. And I thought that's an extraordinary statement. You know, this is the new gatekeeper in chief. He's decided to allow some information through, but to ban it outright is just not how they operate. And for me, this kind of decision has awesome power beyond that of any Russian troll army. So how does this new structure of experience and knowledge shape what is remembered and forgotten? You know, social media as a form of living archive, a constantly evolving record of the everyday, defies our traditional categories and certainties of media provenance, ownership, duration, decay. And Wolfgang Ernst nicely summarises the shift when he says, although the traditional function of the archive is to document an event that took place in one time and one place, the emphasis in the digital archive shifts to regeneration, co-produced by online users for their own needs. And it's this idea of kind of user-generated needs that puncture trust, especially when the kind of living archive of social media is both personal and public in ways like no other archive, you know, enables distortion and manipulation and curation of convenience. Or another way to put this these kind of digital supreme public archives make the past, memory and history vulnerable to hacking on a huge scale. So, for instance, information from what we might call a participative war pours out through kind of an imploded battlefield, hyper-connected in all kinds of ways, you know. So all sides, you know, victims, the militia, bystanders, journalists, all uploading their versions of events to Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp. And, you know, the truth of war, it's actually compounded by too much information. I mean, consider the huge volume of amateur and professional videos uploaded to YouTube from the front line of the Syrian war in the past few years. And in recent months, YouTube has moved to reduce violent content on its platform. Consequently, hundreds of thousands of videos from the war have suddenly disappeared without notice. And an activist, Al-Khatib from the Syrian archive, which they preserve open source evidence of war crimes, says it's like we are writing our memories, not in our own book, but in a third party's book. We don't have control of it, but who should or even could verify the legitimacy of the removed content and that which remains. Overnight then, the digital archive has become a critical technological and cultural force in between individual and social remembering and forgetting, one that alienates remembering from any kind of meaningful control by self and society. So I'd say the archive is fallen, given that the digital muddies provenance, accountabilities and potential redress for versions of the past that have been hacked and manipulated and reconfigured for a whole range of aims. I just want to turn to address a slightly different question, and that is how can we then represent forgetting? One of the advantages of digital databases and records is they allow us to trace trends in the presence or absence of ideas and conversations and popular culture in new ways. And in some of my work, I'm interested in how perceptions of threats of warfare change over time. So, for instance, a consciousness of nuclear war has been displaced, has been forgotten. And this displacement is made firstly through the persistence of a Western mainstream version of heroic warfare, of war legitimised through the repetition of sanitising or glorifying images. And nuclear war, in some ways, and this comes back to our discussion the other day, is crowded out. It's certainly not a heroic form of warfare, but the mainstream media of war is also fed and challenged by the mass volume of an unlimited supply of war and catastrophe available to all. And the divergence here then is kind of a spontaneous, unfinished, unsettled, and mobile emergence of network data compared with a kind of more orderly and contrived and kind of schematic mainstream journalistic archive. And both of these aspects I'm suggesting has displaced the kind of consciousness of nuclear war. And I argue that the Western memory regime, as Jay Winter calls it in his wonderful book, War Beyond Words, which was out last year, argue that the Western memory regime has forgotten nuclear war 3 times. And it's digital resources that enable this forgetting to be made visible. So using a simple Google Books Ngram viewer, research for the term nuclear war and total war. I think I've missed a slide. Never mind. What it shows is that a simple Google back. I'll take this away because that's confusing. From a Google Ngram's point of view, you can see how nuclear war comes in and out of consciousness. So you've got the kind of Cuban Missile. You've got, of course, Hiroshima, and then you've got the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then you've got another bump with the Cold War, and it goes down like that. And so you've got, so the whole notion of total war recedes sharply after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Again, I said after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the term nuclear war declines again. And then after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Moscow-Washington hotline was set up to allow direct communication between the US and Russia. And after the Cold War, there's a steep decline in the prominence of the term nuclear war, and it continues to decline in the opening years of this century. And what I'm trying to say is the usage of these terms, at least English language books, suggests how the threat of nuclear war moves in and out of a roughly Western consciousness. And this is kind of a dangerous form of forgetting that leads to complacency. Namely, that the removal of a widespread perception of the threat of nuclear war actually makes that war more likely, some people argue. And so maybe Trump's recent dilly-dallying around the nuclear issue complicates that history, I'm not sure. But perhaps the reverse is also true. A blockage of the actual potential threat to the constant speculation about the threat. So we go from forgetting to too much information. And developing digital methods, I ask, how can we begin to make sense of what remains and what is lost of this memory of warfare online? So I've been collaborating with people in computing science for a couple of years, trying to develop a system of machine learning to look at the relationship between images used to represent different wars. So this involved kind of identifying relevant images in social media using what's called an image classifier database. And so we looked at images related to information and nuclear war, information war in terms of computing science and software and machine learning is much more difficult to classify than nuclear war. But here's a chart at least of some occurrence of some relevant images posted on Facebook in recent years. So here we can see a bump in the images related to nuclear war after 2012, and I'm speculating this probably relates to the fact that Putin was testing a number of nuclear missiles in October 2012. But what this shows then is there's a kind of viral archive of war, how social media tracks events through sourcing an instant supply of images, posted, shared and commented upon. So going forward, I want to try and develop this experimental work to show how amidst the kind of apparent chaos of images in social media, we can at least begin to identify trends and represent and illuminate understandings of digital forgetting and remembering. And again, on this question of how can we represent forgetting, I've been working with the artist Shona Illingworth on a new blueprint. Our work takes the form of a blueprint in keeping with the kind of material architecture blueprints that we use as working diagrams for building design before digital means transform their representation. And our aim is to kind of, I guess, ground a kind of layered materiality into the subject of the immateriality characteristic of much of warfare today, in terms of remote targeting and killing, and how citizens are threatened in new ways in relation to physical and psychological threats from above. And the image might be too big for this to load, but it might come up. Can't see it very well, but at least it might give you some idea. I don't think it's going to let me try it. The image is just too big. Anyway, you can come and have a look close if you want later, but what we're trying to do is show how kind of layers how war today needs to be navigated and anchored in time and space, so it's not overlooked and forgotten amidst the ephemeral and invisible, but also the overload and continuousness of information about war that flows through social and mainstream media. So to this end, we layer over. This is actually a map of Aleppo with media templates in the New York Times, employed to frame current war through the lens of early devastating war. It's a vision of remembering and forgetting, of a new memory of the multitude of fragmenting and disappearing archives. We've got a scattering of YouTube video stills shot by the Syrian army, and all of this is seen through this kind of, can't quite see it here, but there's a kind of drone vision, the layered grid scoping its next target. Meanwhile, another war that's forgotten is also represented in a different way. There's some shattered glass here from a photograph I took of a completely destroyed major hospital near Sloviansk in Ukraine. So, so what we have here is kind of layered, stacked, connected, simultaneously mainstream and periphery, old and new mainstreams coexisting and colliding, visceral yet hidden, remembered yet forgotten. And if you want a definition of what some call war in the grey zone, then I think that is it. So, forgetting then, so let me try and sum up now some of these ideas. This doesn't play ball anymore. It's saying you've given me too big an image. What's going on? So, let me try and sum up some of these ideas then. I've tried to show digital forgetting as dynamic and something other than the opposite of remembering. Flows of digital data like warring consciousness reshapes notions of presence and absence. I think it's more useful to think of how the past is made present as a kind of latent resource with the potential to emerge again or not, as Ricoeur suggests. So, what might have been called so forgetting that it's not only a matter of erasure and an absence, but it's also a matter of the existence of something latent with potential of becoming memory, of access to what Paul Ricoeur calls oubli de reserve. So whereas what might have been called definitive forgetting is forgetting through the erasing of traces. And the idea of irreversible forgetting, even toward the idea of the unforgettable, this is the reserve of forgetting, Ricoeur argues. And as Elida Aspman considers cultural memory institutions in terms of what is displayed, the canon, and that which is hidden, the archive. And following this, Tseng and Winter state that archives entail an element of silence which carries the potential of being disclosed. And forgetting in the digital age is transformed precisely because the reservoir of the past is messed up. It's expanded and connected and networked beyond any kind of human scale in astonishingly vast and complex ways. Archives envelop us. So let me just conclude by saying there are two principal modes of digital forgetting. The first is the past made present. This is the past that is suddenly made available and newly revived through a combination of technological exposure and connectivity and digitization. But what is pivotal here is how this technological impetus heightens and colludes with a contemporary desire to turn over and turn on that past. Forgetting in this case is how an obsession with the past distracts us from a proper confrontation with the issues of our time. In short, it's used as cover. In particular, the drive of the memory booms, mostly remembrance of 20th century wars, hijacks attention and focus from the nature and causes of current day conflicts and an inability to arrest them. The second is the present made past, the present is the future's past, and I've argued that this is forgetting as a belief in erasure. The incoming present is fundamentally archival, wherein the ease and compulsion of connectivity, of everything, the entanglement of the network ego engenders a kind of a fetishization of total memory. So we get this through life tracking and life journaling that feeds the myth of the digital as the reality of one's past. And this gives digital life the character of something easy to control, of being harnessable through a suite of apps and programs, as with the appearance of something easily erasable. And as Benjamin Bratton argues, new content like the billions of images uploaded to Facebook or Instagram are already archived, socialized and disseminated in near real time. He says for such services, the archive is the primary channel of communication, the index is the medium of the message. And it's no wonder then that the basic everyday communication through messaging apps and texts and emails have become part of a new battleground, as I've argued, of privacy, of ownership and control of one's digital trails, a new kind of haunting, of not being forgotten. And the algorithm intervenes part of a new invisibility. Indeed, part of the silence that we Kerr and Winter write of is part of the greater potential of being disclosed, the greater risk of emergent, I've called it. And the algorithmic passing adds a very different but nonetheless supportive dimension to Reeves' thesis on the merits of forgetting. But as I have shown, forgetting as a kind of inevitable state of being is ever more improbable in the digital era. Instead, increasingly we inhabit an uncertain and risky space, somewhere between remembering and forgetting, in which the past lurks in new and unpredictable ways to contaminate our futures anew. And I'll end there.